Welcome back, everyone. New series on the channel. We already have one series going on for the channel. That is our current Succeeding with Stoicism series. You guys should definitely check that out if you haven't already. I've got 4 or 5 videos as of this video on the series right now, so make sure to check that out. It's going to be in one of the corners. I think it's this corner. It should be popping up right about now. You guys check out that Succeeding with Stoicism series. This is going to be a somewhat similar series. I'm going on a bit of a Stoicism kick right now on the channel. This is going to be our second review series on the channel. The first review series we did was Jordan B. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos. And you can also find that in one of the corners of the video popping up here now. You guys should also check out that. That was a really fun series that I did, and I really loved that book. So this is our second review series, as I said. This is going to be on William B. Irvine's The Stoic Challenge. Let's see if I can read this backwards with the camera, the phone screen. A Philosopher's Guide to Becoming Tougher, Calmer, and More Resilient. Get the full thing of the book here. This is by William B. Irvine. I know little of Irvine. What I do know of him is just from what I've read from the front and back information flaps on the book, which I'll read in a minute here. From what I do know is he's a professor of philosophy, and he's written at least a few other books on philosophy, and I think some others on Stoicism. But this is it, The Stoic Challenge, A Philosopher's Guide to Becoming Tougher, Calmer, and More Resilient by William B. Irvine, author of A Guide to the Good Life, if any of you guys have heard of that before. So I'm going to structure this review series as I did my previous review series for Dr. Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, where I'm going to go chapter by chapter, not read the whole chapter, but I'll read sections from it that I believe are either the most important or really give you a good gist, good summary, good feel of the chapter. The exception is going to be on the prologue and maybe the ending of the book, depending on how long it is. But I know the prologue or the introduction to this book is pretty short, so I'm going to read that one in its entirety. It's an introduction to the book and lays out a good outline for the rest of the book. Everything after that, I'm not going to do it that way. But I will have the prologue at the very least as an exception. Before we get into it, I'll read the quick information flap, give you guys some background into the book and the author itself, and we'll jump into this new book. Some people bounce back in response to setbacks and others break. We often think that these responses are hardwired, but fortunately this is not the case. Stoicism offers us an alternative approach. Plumbing the wisdom of one of the most popular and successful schools of thought from ancient Rome, philosopher William B. Irvine teaches us to turn any challenge on its head. The Stoic Challenge, then, is the ultimate guide to improving your quality of life through tactics developed by ancient Stoics from Marcus Aurelius and Seneca to Epictetus. This book uniquely combines ancient Stoic insights with techniques discovered by contemporary psychological research, such as anchoring and framing. The result is a surprisingly simple strategy for dealing with life's unpleasant and unexpected challenges, from minor setbacks like being caught in a traffic jam or having a flight canceled, to major setbacks like those experienced by physicist Stephen Hawking, who slowly lost the ability to move, and writer Jean-Dominique Bauby, who suffered from locked-in syndrome. The Stoics discovered that thinking of challenges as tests of character can dramatically alter our emotional responses to them. Irvine's updated Stoic test strategy teaches us how to transform life's stumbling blocks into opportunities for becoming calmer, tougher, and more resilient. Not only can we overcome everyday obstacles, we can benefit from them too. The Stoic Challenge is a practical, refreshingly optimistic guide that uses centuries-old wisdom to help us better cope with the stresses of modern living. Good informational flap there into the book. And quick little blurb about a little bit of background on Dr. Irvine before we get into this. William B. Irvine is professor of philosophy at Wright State University, the author of 7 books, including A Guide to the Good Life. He's also written for the Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post, Salon, Time, and the BBC. He lives in Dayton, Ohio. So, let's get into the prologue or introduction section of the Stoic Challenge, a philosopher's guide to becoming tougher, calmer, and more resilient. Flip to the introduction here. Introduction titled A Day at the Airport. Here we go. I was flying across the United States and had to make a connection in Chicago. The plane that would have taken me home was delayed by weather. When it finally arrived, we were asked to board, but as soon as we got seated, we were asked to deplane. The plane's cargo door, we were told, wasn't working properly. After we'd sat in the terminal for 15 minutes, we were asked to reboard, which we gladly did. 10 minutes later, the flight attendant made another announcement. The ground crew had successfully gotten the cargo door closed, but then someone realized that one suitcase hadn't been put on board. They opened the door to put it in, but were then unable to close it again. The minor problem, in other words, had turned into a major problem. The attendant once again asked us to deplane. Inside the terminal, the gate agent said that they were going to get another plane for us, but shortly thereafter, he announced that because the hour was so late, no plane would be available until the morning. A groan went up from the passengers. He assured us that the airline would put us up at its own expense at a nearby hotel, an assurance that was met with even more groans. I was, I must admit, among the groaners. But then I realized what was happening. The Stoic Gods had contrived this event on my behalf as a kind of challenge. Game on, I said to no one in particular. I did this because I knew from experience that by treating this setback as a challenge, by assuming more precisely that the Stoic Gods had administered the setback as a test of my resilience and resourcefulness, I could simultaneously reduce the emotional cost of being set back and increase my chances of finding a workaround. At this point, though, some words of explanation are in order. To begin with, I'm not a member of some obscure religious cult. I'm a modern adherent of an ancient philosophy. More precisely, I am a practicing Stoic, in the sense that I've chosen to live my 21st century life in accordance with the strategies for living that were devised 2,000 years ago by the Stoic philosophers Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, among others. I'm not alone in making this choice. A growing number of people have realized that they lack what the ancient philosophers would have called a philosophy of life. Such a philosophy tells you what in life is worth having and provides you with a strategy for obtaining it. If you try to live without a philosophy of life, you'll find yourself extemporizing your way through your days. As a result, your daily efforts are likely to be haphazard and your life is likely to be misspent. What a waste. It's important to realize that Stoicism is not a religion. Its primary concern is not with our afterlife, but with our time spent on earth. That said, I should add that Stoicism is compatible with many religions, including Christianity and Islam. But here another clarification is in order. Above, I made reference to the Stoic Gods. I don't believe that these gods actually exist as physical or even as spiritual beings. They are, for me, fictitious entities. By invoking them, I can transform what for many people would simply be an unfortunate setback into a kind of mind game. Doing this lets me respond to setbacks without becoming frustrated, angry, or despondent. Those who dislike invoking imaginary gods as part of a psychological strategy may instead invoke an imaginary coach or teacher. The psychological effect will be equivalent. And those who do believe in God may proceed on the assumption that the setback in question is part of God's plan for them, or if they're Muslim, part of Allah's plan, as many Christians and Muslims already do. In what follows, I'll have more to say about the Stoic test mind game and the psychological research that lies behind it, and I'll give my advice on how best to play the game, but first let me finish my airport story. We were given hotel vouchers and told to wait for a shuttle bus. We subsequently boarded it and soon arrived at our destination. After waiting in line at the reception desk, I was assigned a room and headed off for what I imagined would be at most 4 hours of sleep. My room, it turned out, was a long walk and elevator ride from the lobby, and when I opened the door, I saw that it was in a state of disarray. Had I not been a Stoic, I would at this point have broken into righteous anger. How stupid is this? How dare they? By thinking of it as part of a challenge by the Stoic Gods, though, I had a rather different thought. What a clever wrinkle. I hadn't seen this coming. Well played, Stoic Gods. I retraced my steps back to the front desk and explained the situation to the clerk. Had I gotten angry at him, everyone, including the clerk, would have understood, but would getting angry have been worth the price? Clearly not, if what I valued was my equanimity. It also helped me stay calm, to think of the clerk not as a malicious person, but merely as a bit player in this challenge that the Stoic Gods have devised for me. The clerk gave me the key for a room that he assured me, quote, ought to be clean. This prediction turned out to be correct. I got what sleep I could and went down in the early morning to board the shuttle that was taking us back to the airport. It carried mostly passengers from my canceled flight, and they spent the ride trying to top each other in their complaints about the airline, the airport, and the hotel. As I watched all of this, I felt lucky not to be sharing their disgruntled state of mind. I reflected on what a bunch of spoiled brats we 21st century humans are. Here we were in a climate-controlled bus, heading toward a climate-controlled airport, so we could fly across the country in a climate-controlled airplane. Should we experience thirst on that flight, someone would bring us the beverage of our choice. And if the flight was long enough, someone would offer us food. Should our bowels move, there would be a flush toilet just down the aisle. And not to be forgotten, the toilet in question would in all likelihood have toilet paper. What, I wondered, would the American pioneers have thought of us? They might, during their lifetime, have crossed the country, but their journey would have involved wagons, weeks of discomfort, and perhaps encounters with, understandably, hostile Native Americans. Yes, the seats on those wagons would have been roomier than modern airplane seats, but many pioneers would have walked instead of ridden. These walkers might have wanted to avoid putting any additional strain on their already overloaded wagons, or they might simply have preferred walking to being jostled around by the wagon's bumpy ride. Back then, after all, there were no superhighways. Indeed, in many places, there were barely even rutted roads. Oh, and not to be forgotten, on this many weeks-long journey, there would have been neither toilets nor toilet paper. What we modern flyers were experiencing, even with our recent setbacks, would to them have been a miracle. And yet, here we were, whining about our discomfort and life's unfairness. Our replacement plane took off and landed without further incident. At my home airport, I found my car where I left it, and drove to my house without encountering any figurative or literal roadblocks. On arriving home, I concluded that the test was over, so I graded my performance. I'd done quite well, I thought, in remaining calm and collected, despite the various provocations I'd been presented with. I therefore felt victorious. Chalk one up for me, I said to no one in particular. It was unlikely, I thought, that my fellow passengers emerged from our stranding with this upbeat attitude. I've used this setback response strategy on many occasions with similar results. For many of us, becoming frustrated or angry is the natural response to not getting what we want. Getting angry is just what we do. Fortunately, an alternative response exists. It's both easy to use and remarkably effective. I call it the Stoic test strategy. When faced with a setback, we should treat it as a test of our resilience and resourcefulness, devised and administered, as I've said, by imaginary Stoic gods. Their goal in throwing these curveballs our way is to make our days not harder, but better. This statement is, I realize, paradoxical, but trust that in the pages that follow, I'll explain why we should be thankful for being tested in this manner. As its name implies, the Stoic test strategy was invented by the ancient Stoics. Yes, the Stoics were philosophers, but in the ancient world, philosophers wore many different occupational hats. Besides doing what we today would think of as philosophy, they also did physics, biology, mathematics, logic, and psychology. Their contributions to each of these fields were significant, but the Stoics' contribution to psychology is particularly impressive. Indeed, the Stoic test strategy is based on their appreciation of a phenomenon that's been rediscovered by modern psychologists, who christened it the framing effect. How we mentally characterize a situation has a profound impact on how we respond to it emotionally. The Stoics realized that we have considerable flexibility in how we frame the situations we experience. They discovered more precisely that by thinking of setbacks as tests of our character, we can dramatically alter our emotional response to them. We can, in particular, develop our ability to stay calm, even in the face of very significant setbacks, and this, in turn, can have a dramatic impact on our quality of life. Many people, I should add, have an incorrect perception of the Stoics. They think of them as emotionless beings whose primary goal was to stand there and grimly take whatever life threw at them, but this wasn't the case. Their goal wasn't to banish emotions, but to minimize the number of negative emotions, like feelings of frustration, anger, grief, envy, that they experienced. They had nothing against the experience of positive emotions, including delight and even joy. We should think of the Stoics not as grim individuals, but as eternal optimists who possessed a profound ability to put a positive spin on life's events. Rather than experiencing frustration and anger on being set back, they might experience no small measure of satisfaction on successfully dealing with the challenge presented them by that setback. It's tempting at this point to describe the Stoics as patient people, and indeed, they were, but a caveat is in order. In one sense, a patient person is one who can suffer a setback without complaint. This isn't, however, what the Stoics were doing. Their goal was not to remain calm while suffering a setback, but rather to experience a setback without thereby suffering. It's an important difference. This book is an exercise in what might be thought of as 21st century Stoicism. In these pages, I've fused the advice given by the first century Stoic philosophers with the research done by late 20th century psychologists. Some in academia will resent me for meddling with classical Stoicism in this manner. They think of Stoicism the way they think of a priceless ancient relic, as something to be kept in a hermetically sealed case, to be seen but not touched. By contrast, I treat Stoicism as a tool that, although in need of sharpening because of the passage of time, is not only still useful, but can have a profoundly beneficial impact on modern lives. The ancient Stoics, I should add, probably wouldn't have objected to my update of their doctrines. Seneca in particular would have approved. It was he, after all, who declared, "I do not bind myself to some particular one of the Stoic masters. I too have the right to form an opinion." I don't claim to have the profound Stoic insights that Seneca possessed, but I do have available to me something he lacked, namely the insight into the workings of the human mind gained by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, among others. I put these insights to work as I explore and explain the Stoic test strategy for dealing with setbacks. I began by describing the sorts of setbacks to which we're susceptible and the ways in which we typically respond to them. Although many people become frustrated, angry, anxious, or even despondent, others take setbacks in their stride. How do they do it, and how can we emulate them? I then explore the psychology of setbacks. Why do they affect us emotionally the way they do? I go on to show how, instead of thinking of setbacks merely as unfortunate experiences, we can reframe them as tests of our resilience and ingenuity. Doing this can have a profound impact on how we respond to them. Instead of experiencing a mixture of anger and anxiety, we might be surprised to discover that we're rising enthusiastically to the challenge presented by the setback. And finally, I show how using the Stoic test strategy, besides helping our days go better, can help us have a good life. And when it comes time to make our exit from this world, a good death. So that is the prologue or introduction to William B. Irvine's The Stoic Challenge, a philosopher's guide to becoming tougher, calmer, and more resilient. And the next video in this series, we'll be moving on to part 1, dealing with life's challenges. And we'll start with chapter 1 there, will be our next video episode here. As I said in this video, that I'm not going to continue doing a full reading for every single chapter. I just wanted to do that for the prologue, and maybe I'll do it for the epilogue or for the conclusion of the book. But I really enjoyed that introduction. I really enjoyed his story at the airport. I mean, that makes sense. That's what most people's typical reaction would be following a setback or some kind of disappointment like that. Righteous anger, as he talked about. I've heard people talk about this righteous anger, particularly people like on YouTube, for example, who are into philosophy or Stoicism in particular. They talk about how anger, like righteous anger in particular, can be a convenient justification for people to become upset and become angry, and in his example, go up to that hotel clerk at the front desk and start yelling and throwing their hands up and saying, I came into my hotel room and it's a complete mess. What are you guys doing? Like, it's funny they do that because that's an all expense paid night, and there's someone would still complain about getting a room that they didn't actually pay for. But no, it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense. And first time I read this book, after reading this introduction, I was very excited, and I don't agree with everything in this book, or I don't find everything in this book incredibly helpful, but I do understand his points. I definitely understand his points, though I don't take everything, and that's fine. I'm sure Dr. Irvine wouldn't really care. He'd say, well, you have that right. But for the vast majority of the book, I really enjoyed it. So I hope you guys will as well. I'm excited for this review series. Like I said, 12 Rules for Life series was really fun. And I'm really looking forward to getting into Dr. William B. Irvine's The Stoic Challenge, a philosopher's guide to becoming tougher, calmer, and more resilient. So I will catch you guys in the next video of this series, of this book review series here. Make sure to subscribe for more content in the future, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment and join the discussion. Let me know what you guys want me to talk about next, what you are thinking so far of this book. If you're excited for it, I definitely am excited to keep moving on with this review series into the future. And that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.